Hi class, this is Mr. Cruz. I'm back for another video of, or rather about The Great Gatsby. This time I'm going to be talking about Chapter 9, and I'm going to be honing in on a couple points that I think are most important. This time around I won't really go too much detail about like the just basic things that happen as much as a couple of key points to take away from the novel itself. I mean, at this point, Gatsby has died, so the in terms of just the narrative of the novel, like I wouldn't say it stops. It's somewhat comes to a conclusion. Like it's concluding. So, but we did identify Nick Carraway as the main character. So him, taking on this responsibility, which he sees as his own, of taking care of Gatsby's estate, taking care of Gatsby himself. Um, this is kind of like the end of the whole thing and kind of what he learns through the process. First thing is he really goes hard at especially East Eggers, but he goes hard at that Long Island society, and he goes hard at them basically because of Tom and Daisy. Even after everything that took place, Tom and Daisy, when Nick tries to reach out to them saying that there's going to be a funeral for Gatsby, he can't reach them because they've left town. Ironically enough, the movie shows them about to leave, and kind of like, suggesting like we don't want to talk to Nick or whatever. The novel doesn't do that. It kind of suggests that they had already left, that they were already gone from Long Island, that they pretty much vanished, right? And for Nick, he sees this as like a total, it's beyond careless. It's a retreat into themselves, right? If you were to think of perhaps like the way that Daisy retreated into her own security after meeting Gatsby, for instance, waiting for him and having a vision, a dream of life that was more than just this like kind of fantasy world that she felt like she was living in with Gatsby. She wanted something secure, so she got with Tom. Nick says this interestingly. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess that they made. And so here we have a very, very radical critique of that society, but, like metaphor, kind of allegorized by Tom and Daisy, right? That it's not just that they're careless in the sense that like I don't think about you, I don't care about you, that kind of thing. It's that this is a pattern, right, of messing with people, of smashing people up, right, of smashing creatures and things, and then when things are all messed up, retreating back to their money, and of course like he says, letting other people clean up their messes, but retreating back to their money with the assumption that they never did anything, right? I never did anything. We hung out a little bit and then I came back home, I couldn't handle that anymore, right? And of course, when you have that kind of money, it gives you the security of being able to say like, yeah, well, I wasn't involved with that business any longer, right? But to the people who are not in that same position, they are smashed up, and it's very difficult to pick yourself up and put yourself together after something like that, which is what happens to Nick. He's smashed up. He's witnessed the death of really a friend. Someone who Daisy supposedly said she loved, and she couldn't even come to the funeral. But more than that, though, Tom and Daisy are not the only ones that can't come to the funeral. Meyer Wolfsheim, of course, can. And to be perfectly frank, I kind of like expected that. Um, not like this guy was like a really good guy anyway. But it's the fact that nobody else comes, which is, I think, most surprising because everybody uses Gatsby for his parties and his money, his connections, but nobody ever actually saw him as a person except for Nick, right? And that's the part I think that for Nick is so much more noticeable in the ninth chapter. He's more interpretive in this chapter. And that's a really important thing, I think, is that he's more interpretive of his experience. He's not just looking and describing things. But at this point, the description is over. He's what's called maybe analyzing and synthesizing, which is to say he's analyzing the present moment based on the past, right? And he's synthesizing, trying to like bring it all together, make sense of it. He's really working hard to focus on what it is that what is it that there is to learn from this situation. And I want to jump to the end because I don't want to I don't want to belabor the point of carelessness, but I do want to jump to the end. Gatsby is this. The text says hope-filled. Gatsby is this incredibly hope-filled dreamer that one day he could be reunited with the girl he loves. And he truly does these things for love. And there's like a kind of cynicism that I think modern society has adopted. And I think that I would include myself in that. There's a cynicism that's attached to modern society. Like, I think last video I talked about how, some of you might consider Gatsby a simp, for instance. Like there's a sense in which we buck against this kind of moving towards something that may be unattainable, but we move toward it anyway with the hope that one day it will be within our grasp. If you remember the scene of Gatsby reaching out into the river that separates East Egg and West Egg, and him looking out onto Daisy's house in her, fancy house, that big money that she has over there, and just like kind of reaching out, almost like this green light was within grasp, right? And it's Nick who identifies this as not something. Gatsby sees it as he's reaching into his future, right? He sees it as he's heading toward the dream that's like within his grasp. Nick doesn't see it that way at the end of the novel. It was always his past that he was trying to reach for, not his future, right? We always look to something, to the good life, because we look to the past, not to the future. We don't say like, oh, there's something new coming, and guess what? I'm reaching for the new thing. No, we look to the past and say, hey, that was good time back then. I want that same experience now or in the future to come, right? Because that's how we know what the good life is, what goodness is, because of our experience of the good life or of goodness, right? And for Gatsby, he can't identify the fact that he's reaching into the past for something that was already done. Now, that's not all our experiences, but for Gatsby, it's something that's already finished. Nick says this at the end. He did not know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Which is to say, the experience Gatsby has with Daisy is not something that he can do over. A couple chapters before, Nick tells Gatsby, you cannot repeat the past, right? And then if Gatsby says, why, of course you can, old sport. No, you can't. Nick was right. You can't. It's not possible. But there was something in Gatsby trying, which is what is most, I guess, brings the most hope for Nick, which is that maybe he tried and failed, and that's totally fair. But at least he tried, and he's not like these modern people who retreat back into their money or who retreat back into their own lives. He actually went for someone, for something else, and he made every attempt until the end of his life. And that's not something that we do very much in modern society, because if it's not retreating back into your money, it's retreating back into your own comforts, right? Like, I don't think that necessarily Fitzgerald is only talking about people who have like a lot of wealth, and we're like, hey, they're the bad, people with wealth. I think he's trying to make a comment about modern life, which is that we retreat back into comforts. My own comfortable living in this apartment, my own comfortable living within the food that I have to eat, my own comfortable living with the books that I have, like I've got all the books here that are around me, and I can read until my heart's content, right? Because I don't have to worry about things like, hunger and poverty and whether or not my child is going to eat, whether or not we're going to have enough money at the end of the month, or whether or not, at this point, like whether or not I'm going to be unemployed, or at this point, those are not concerns of mine. So I can have the luxury of retreating back into a kind of luxury, a kind of comfort that is not afforded many people, right? Even right now during COVID. And it's the same thing, I think, even in The Great Gatsby. The only one that does not retreat is Gatsby. He stays, and he's someone who is a faithful lover, right? A faithful lover who ends up getting killed. And believe it or not, being a faithful lover can get you killed. Consider Jesus' status as a faithful lover. It's the type of thing that can get you killed. Think about Jesus' disciples as expressing faith in their love for Jesus. It can get you killed, right? That's the sort of danger that true love. Like, not like, oh my gosh, I love him from the first time I saw him. I mean, a true kind of love that is expressed to another person through like a long period of time, or like the long suffering of an individual for another. Think about Gatsby's long suffering. If you don't know that word, it just means that you're willing to bear anything for that person. The long suffering Gatsby shows Daisy. It ends up being the thing that kills him, right? Because before Gatsby and Daisy had made any contact, before Nick, Gatsby got along pretty well, right? Like, he was waiting for Daisy, but he got along fairly well in the world. Nick continues, Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster. Here's I think, the whole point of the novel, though. We look into the past, as I said beforehand. We're always trying to grasp the thing that eludes us, which is to say, I think I've used this metaphor a little bit in class. It's like when you try to grab smoke, like after like a candle has been like the fire from a candle has been eliminated, and there's smoke that arises from that, and you try to grasp the smoke, and then what does it do? It just dissipates in your hand, and it like moves in different directions, right? Like that's kind of like eluding. You can't grasp the thing. It's consistently moving away from you, right? For that dream that Gatsby has, and I think the dream, the American dream that Gatsby that Fitzgerald is trying to talk about, is that it's always eluding us, And that's not to say, for example, like in the American dream, your dream may be to, like, one day buy a house, right? And let's say you buy a house. Great, kudos, congratulations, amazing, right? You were able to do it, you achieved your dream. But here's the problem, right? When you achieve your dream, you realize your dream is no longer the dream that you once had, right? It's to acquire something different or to acquire something more. Because the house was never able to contain a fully sized dream that you once had. Like, I mean, you used the house at one point as a kind of like allegory for the dream that you have. But then now that you have the house, you don't no longer just want the house. You want something more, right? You want a house and a new car. And then you get the new car and you're like, well, there's something more, right? And there's always something more. And there's always something more. And by all accounts, we might look at that person and say, they got to their dream according to our dream, right? But according to theirs, it's always elusive. And ours, by the way, is exactly as elusive as well. That's the American dream, because it's, for Fitzgerald. For Fitzgerald, the American dream is elusive precisely because we cannot be satisfied with the things that we have, right? Being content with the things that we have is not a part of, again, for Fitzgerald, the human experience. Desire always leads to a kind of excess, more. And so what do? Well, we can't quite get it. So tomorrow, what are we going to do? We're going to run faster. We'll stretch out our arms farther, right? We'll run faster and faster and faster until we get it. Knowing either unconsciously or subconsciously that we can't quite get it, right? But we're going to keep running and keep running and keep running and keep running until one day, or this is what Fitzgerald says, one fine morning, right? And he just puts what's called an M dash, which is basically, usually you would put an M dash. If you don't know what it is, you could look it up. You'd put an M dash if you wanted to signify a break in the sentence because you're about to say something else, right? So usually it's more than just like a comma, for instance, where you're taking like a rest and then you're going on to the next word. And it's not quite a period because it's not the final part of the sentence. It's a break in the sentence in which you would stop, but it suggests that you will eventually get to the next place in the sentence. So it says, and one fine morning, and then it gives you an M dash, and it just leaves it there, right? And stylistically, what can we take away from there? That one day that, either you'll get it, which I personally don't think that's what Fitzgerald's saying. And one fine morning, no, you're not going to get it because realistically, we just said it eludes us, right? The past eludes us. Our desires elude us. And then one fine morning, to me, this is my interpretation. One fine morning, that's it. You're dead. And that's, I think, the power of Fitzgerald, and particularly Nick Carraway as a protagonist, is that he recognizes this. Now, you may see this as like, wow, this is terribly, unchristianly, and I'm going to explain for a second why I disagree with that. And then you may also be thinking like, wow, that's incredibly like sad and like really just without hope. And that would probably be more true, because one of the things the modernist writers, and I talked a little bit about that in last live class, the modernist writers were concerned with the breakdown of this traditional ways of looking at life, of classical ways of looking at life, maybe like from the Greeks and the Romans, where your soul lives on for eternity, or even in a Christian sense in which your soul again would live on into eternity, but we would be, the manifestations of the kingdom of God are here and present with us in this, on earth as we live. For the modernists, that there's no such manifestations. Like, these things don't occur. Like, yeah, we may have some pleasures in life, but they're predominantly material in nature. Think about like the partying, the drinking, and all the things that go on in this, like the way that money consumes us. And by the way, this is very connected to how people live in 2020. Live while you can, when you can, right? Money, 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 money. This is what matters, right? The value of life is the significance of your net worth, right? Think about that for just a second. Like, somebody asks you, like, well, what's your net worth? They're always talking about money, always, right? Which is, if you're not sure about what net worth is, it's just the assets minus the liabilities, or the debt that you have, right? So if you own $1 million in assets and then you owe $500,000 in debt, then you are worth $500,000, right? And somebody asks you like your net worth, it's always in relation to money. So don't be too quick to judge this like 1920s world. 2020 is exactly the same, right? We think in terms of this like the worthiness of somebody who has material things in their own life. We look at someone who doesn't have material things as a variety of different things. And unfortunately, sometimes even in Christianity, our theology of the poor can be very, very bare. Just like, we say things, like, well, they're lazy and they don't work hard enough. And when, if you read The Great Gatsby, it's very clear that neither one of these people worked at all, right? Like, I mean, that's just the truth, right? But, working class people, for instance, who are working in this society, you got to think like a coal miner for some company, or like, a factory worker, for example. I mean, they work 12, 13, 14 hours a day, get paid relatively small wages, and they live in their very small place, right? Whereas the East and West Eggers they go back into their money and they're just relatively bored with everything, right? The other thing I wanted to talk though about, I mentioned about whether or not there's like a Christian aspect to this novel, because I talked about the modern aspect of the novel, which is that, yeah, I think there is a kind of hopelessness at the center of this novel, which is very consistent with a lot of other modern novels in this fashion, right? Especially modern American novels. Although I think there is a kind of hope, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the video, but a lot of modern American novels do operate with this, like if you read Ernest Hemingway, or if you read, William Faulkner, things like that. There's always this sense in which, you're alone, right? Like even though, you may have a lot of people around you, you're hopelessly alone. There's a sense in which you are a stranger even to the people that you come in contact with, or the people that you say you're close with, or even yourself, right? You're a stranger to yourself. How much do you really know yourself, right? And Nick feels that, I think, at the end, because Gatsby must have felt so alone with all the people that had come to his party, because those people are no longer here. And it's not just like that when you're alive. You don't just, you're not just finding that out upon your death. Like, oh man, guess what? Nobody cared about me. No, you know that pretty much like during your own life. Nick finds that out as he's alone in the city, which it says in chapter 9 that he can't really take anymore. He can't take the city because it haunts him. Right. And again, we're looking at the past there. The hauntings aspect is the past being with Gatsby, this whole situation with Daisy and Tom. It's haunting him because it keeps coming up, manifesting itself in the present. I keep seeing certain things that remind me of, this group of people. He even sees Tom in the city, and Tom acts like nothing happened, right? Like, how can you act like that? Somebody died. I'm more than somebody. Miss Wilson died, but Mr. Wilson also died, and Gatsby died. Like, I mean, three people. Like, what else do you want? Like to at least feel some sense of remorse. But when he meets Tom, he had what was coming to him. He was working with all these gamblers and people. That was probably going to happen anyway. And of course, Nick is horrified by this. It's in Gatsby that he sees a kind of American loneliness, like I said, but also another American character, which is the hopeful part of the novel that I think maybe is something we could hold on to. He says at the very end, "So we beat on," right? Boats against the current, which is to say currents take you in a certain direction, right? So we can look at the current as time, right? We talked a little bit about time in our class. Time moves in one direction. It goes forward, right? It's always moving, let's say, towards our elderly age. It moves towards our death. So a current can be looked a little bit like time in the sense that it carries us in a particular direction, especially if we don't have like a sail or anything like that, just a small boat. The current takes us. But we beat on, which is to say, like, we continue on going against the current, always trying to, if you want to look at a current as like a kind of act of God, time is like an act of God, for instance, like, we press on against that act of God, which we know we can't do anything about. Like, when an act of God happens in your life, it's not like you're just like, "No, God, no." Like, that's not how it works. When an act of God occurs, it occurs because it's God, and you're just like a human. But we do continue to keep beating on, right? Boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. And that, I think, is probably the most hopeful part of the novel, which is that, yes, we continue doing all these things that they did. We continue to go back into the past, even though we shouldn't. But the reason we continue doing it is because we have the ability as human beings to interpret the world, to make sense of the world, to read what our present situation is by understanding the past. And maybe in doing that, what it does is helps us to love in a certain type of way, right? It's only through looking into the past that we can understand what it means to fall into the truth. It's only in looking into the past that we can see what goodness is like. It's only in looking into the past that I know myself. And it's only in looking into the past that I have the capacity to love someone else. And if you run away from your past, what it does is you may think that you're running away, but it always follows you. It's always keeping pace with you, right? And that's the thing about Gatsby that's so inspiring. He opens himself up to love in a way that modern people often don't, right? We call things love because we don't really understand it that well. Marriage is not, I think it is a pledge of love, but someone getting married doesn't necessarily mean that they have experienced what love is, right? Just because you were able to sign a piece of paper or able to walk down an aisle of a church, or maybe not a church. Maybe you were able to walk down the pathway of a park because you got married at a gazebo. That doesn't mean that you know what love is, or that you've felt what love is, or that you've opened yourself up to that love. No, it's in the beating against the current, and it's in the going back into the past that we can actually see what love is. hopefully because we've been shown love from other people, and hopefully because the stories of our parents, the stories of the people that love us, have been able to help us understand what love is. And I think Augustine, who is someone I think you all should pay attention to, in his Confessions talks about how his mother Monica gives him the first impressions about himself. There's a curriculum scholar, and because I study curriculum, I'm going to use her, named Madeleine Grumet, who says that the hands which nurture you and caress you as a child are the same hands that point to a world which is worthy of notice. They teach us, right, how to love. And it's in going into the past and regressing into those moments, the things that you've learned from experience, in recollecting those experiences, we open ourselves to the possibility of something more beautiful about being human, which is to love someone else. Nick Carraway is changed by that. Gatsby is changed by that. And I think Fitzgerald is trying to offer us the opportunity to be changed by that as well. All right, guys, that's it for me, Gatsby. I'll see you for class. Love you all.